The story I'm going to tell, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding it, occurred in the county I grew up in, and have now, after a few years, returned to. I've wanted to share it with you for some time. The town of Somerton, in the English county of Somerset, is a beautiful place with a rich history by all accounts, full of the charms of a time long past by. But in August of 1896, to quote the long-running regional newspaper the Western Gazette, a ghastly discovery was made in one of the houses here. A house once known as the Green was owned by a man named Thomas Welsh. Mr. Welsh, who had lived at the house all of his life, died in 1895 at the age of 80. His younger brother James inherited a small portion of the large property, with the rest of the house being put to auction the following year. When a man named Edmund Valentine purchased it in August of 1896, he began a thorough renovation of the place. On Monday, August 31st, Albert Charles Dyer, the workman hired for the job, began to remove floorboards in the attic to lay down a gas pipe, when he found a small doorway which opened into a recess in the attic wall. In order to extend the gas pipe, he needed to open the doorway and remove the floorboards which lay behind it. When he did, he noticed that one of the boards immediately behind the door was loose. As he brought up the 2.5-foot board, he noticed what looked like a small parcel, wrapped in old cloth. When he opened it, he was shocked to find the skeleton of a small baby. Taken aback by his discovery, he quickly called for the owner, Edmund Valentine, who rushed to the house. They continued to rummage beneath the floor and found 3 more skeletons, 2 of which were also wrapped in cloth. Police were called to the house along with 2 local doctors, Dr. Wade and Dr. Hilliard. It was their initial opinion that the infants' bodies had been there for between 10 and 20 years, but at that time it was impossible to be more specific than that. At first the doctors described them all as well developed, but the sex and age of the infants was impossible to define, and to quote the local press, not a particle of flesh remained. After the news was made public 4 days later on September 4th, 1896, rumours began to circulate in the town, and many fingers pointed towards the previous owner, old man Thomas Welsh. He had been a bachelor, but for the last 30 years of his life he had hired a housekeeper, a woman who went by the name of Eliza Edwards, whose real family name was found to be Martin. In 1896, at the time that the bodies were found, she was said to be 50 years old, living in the town with her married son. It was discovered that the cottage they lived in was left to them by Thomas Welsh, who also requested in his will that she receive the sum of £100 a year for living expenses. The relationship between Thomas Welsh and Eliza Edwards, coupled with this financial agreement, fueled the theory that she had given birth to the children and that Welsh was the father. As mentioned previously, a small section of the house where the bodies were found was left to James Welsh, a solicitor and younger brother of Thomas, who utilised his part of the property for his offices. One other person who was approached by the police was an unnamed woman who had done menial jobs around James Welsh's portion of the house for the last 15 years. She denied knowing anything about the infant's remains, but admitted that on one occasion she visited the attic out of curiosity, but saw nothing out of the ordinary and detected no odour. An inquiry was held a week after the discovery on Monday, September 7th, at the local courthouse. The small skeletons were placed in a room beneath the courthouse, where they were viewed by the jury and members of the press. The scene was described as a gruesome spectacle by the Western Gazette. Among those present at the inquiry was coroner for the district, Mr. E.Q. Louch. At first he stated as the remains were skeletal, and there was no way for him to detect how they died, an inquiry was unusual, but went on to say that the reason he'd agreed to it, besides to inform the public of the findings, was because the late owner of the house was a personal friend of his, and he didn't want the public to suspect that he was protecting the reputation of the late Mr. Welsh by not carrying one out. He concluded, along with Dr. Wade, that the babies had been placed there for the purpose of concealment, but he could not be sure if they had all been stillbirths. He added that it was likely that 2 of them had been born alive, as they were fully developed, whereas the other 2 appeared premature. Dr. Wade, one of the doctors called to the Green on the day of the discovery, said that the remains were entirely skeletal, except for one of the hands on one child and 2 of the feet on the others. He stated that the skin and tendons were clearly visible, but completely dried out. Dr. Wade admitted that the length of time that the babies had been there was a matter of pure conjecture. He said that it could be 5, 10 or even 20 years, and there was no way for him to narrow it down any further for 2 reasons. One being that the body of an infant will naturally become skeletal faster than that of an adult, admitting that he didn't know how long that would typically be. The other being that the decomposition process depended heavily on the temperature of the environment the body was in. As they were placed in a dry, cool place, he said that it would likely take much longer than usual. A police constable by the name of Mr. Coomer also spoke at the inquiry, saying that he had taken the remains to the police station and examined the material that 3 of them were wrapped in. He said that there was no markings or clues as to who they belonged to. He also said that he'd made a further search of the house and then investigated the garden, digging at various points on the chance that he may find more remains. He said that he found a number of small bones in the attic that had fallen loose from the skeletons when they were removed, but the garden yielded nothing. It was agreed by all at the inquiry that the bones and wrapping sheets should be preserved for future investigations. When Coroner E.Q. Louch suggested putting the skeletal remains in a museum, he was met with laughter, but he later said, "It is more particular that the wrappings should be preserved, for it is possible that if they were submitted to some microscopical investigation, some mark or other distinctive sign might be found upon them that would help in the further elucidation of the matter." At the closing of the inquiry, Coroner Mr. Louch and Dr. Wade gave an open verdict, but advised that the police should continue their investigations and punish anyone found to be involved if it transpired that the babies had died violent deaths. According to local reports, the now 50-year-old Eliza Edwards, the woman thought most likely to have given birth to the children, was no longer of sound mind. She was even described by the local newspaper as somewhat deranged. Because of her alleged state of mind, she was never told about the skeletons found at her former home. But maybe the very reasons behind her poor mental state were rooted in the attic of that house. After speaking to several long-term residents of the town, I was unable to find out what happened to the infants' remains, or the material they were wrapped in. The house known in 1896 as the Green has since been renamed. I do know that it is a large 2-storey building, situated to the north of the parish church, with 6 attics in total that run the length of the building. An article entitled The Somerton Mystery from the Western Chronicle, dated September 11, 1896, was more specific, stating that the house was in Cow Square, which is indeed directly north of the church. After narrowing down the location of the house to this small area, I noticed that there are a number of buildings in the square that match the description. I then found out that over time this large house may have been separated into smaller properties. The 1891 census of the area has a 76-year-old Thomas Welsh recorded as living in Cow Square, but the exact house is not specified. The previous census from 1881 states that his sister Harriet also lived at the property at the time. My first thought was that maybe she had given birth to the children, but as her age was recorded as 70 in 1881, she would have been in her 60s at the earliest date given by the coroner for the babies' deaths. Unless the coroner's estimates were inaccurate by 20 to 40 years, this is highly unlikely. As my lines of inquiry were coming to an end, I was contacted by a local historian, who wished to remain anonymous. They pointed out the exact house in Cow Square that Thomas Welsh had lived in all of his life. However, as the 16th century property is still a private residence, and out of respect for the people who live there now, it was strongly recommended to me that I don't give its name. The mystery of the 4 babies in the attic remains unsolved to this day.